But the point I'm trying to make is that all of these are joined up and not just kind of added on into legacy processes, which I would probably say is another mistake that a lot of organizations do, which is to put AI on top of legacy processes to make them prettier. There's a saying that someone used to say to me, which is, "Don't put lipstick on a pig," because that's not going to do what you're trying to achieve. Right? So often we'll see a very polished interface in like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever else, all the different tools that we have in place. A polished interface on weak foundations is never going to get us transformation, true transformation in an organization. Perhaps the biggest mistake that organizations or people can make is scaling use cases before they scale capability. So sometimes we're all so focused on Gen AI being able to do something so quickly that we forget that something that needs to be sustained in an organization needs to be done at a scale. A lot of experimentation starts from proof of concepts, which is great, but volume is not maturity. So volume of proof of concept is not maturity. I would even go as far as to say volume of use cases is not a reflection of the maturity of AI usage in an organization.
Welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ashley Braganza, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Moush Verma to the episode. Moush, thank you for taking time out of your hectic diary to join my listeners and me today. Could I ask you to introduce yourself? And I mean, everyone knows Santander, but maybe say a little bit about your role in Santander at the moment.
Of course. Thank you, Ashley, for having me here. I'm Moush, and I am a senior AI lead at Santander UK. What that means is that I head up customer AI and how AI is responsibly and appropriately handled in banking.
Great. Thank you. Moush, tell me, how is AI reshaping how value is created in the banking sector now?
I think for me, AI is shifting the value creation from efficiency execution to much better and contextual guidance for our customers. So historically, most banks have created a lot of value from making transactions safe, scalable, and relatively frictionless from a customer experience perspective. Of course, all that still matters, but increasingly that is not becoming the ceiling for value creation is getting higher. The more interesting question for me now with AI is, can AI help create value through better timing, better relevancy and context for the customer, and of course, better clarity? So that is a different proposition as we move forward. And I think other questions that come to my mind when I look at anything AI related is, can AI help surface the right action earlier, get that timing exactly right, and make it more meaningful for our customers? Maybe simplify the choices that customers have and avoid complexity where it's not needed particularly, and support any sort of financial choices that our customers make, particularly when a small issue becomes a much bigger issue. So I think this shift is quite profound, and it moves banking from being primarily about processing money to helping people navigate money more intelligently. And that's where, to me, that's where the value is shifting towards, not just speed, efficiency, or productivity. And I think sometimes the highest value intervention is not at the speediest answer, but a more meaningful answer, one that gives the customer more confidence, context, and a clearer path forward.
So what for you then distinguishes banks that are genuinely being AI-led from ones who are basically just taking what they currently do and making AI take those activities and just make them faster?
I think I think that's probably one of the biggest distinguishing factors in what's going to sustain us all. If you are just focusing on speed and efficiency, that's only going to get us so far. And we'll talk about this in a bit, but I feel strongly that AI needs to be handled and deployed in a way that preserves our customers' agency. The point of AI should not be for making people and our customers recipients of a machine output, but it should be more about replacing the unnecessary friction that sometimes exists and more supporting customer decisions. I think for me, the future of value in banking is not just a seamless service, but more trusted guidance at meaningful moments in time that we all need.
So this issue of timing, you've mentioned it, a number of times already. Well, unpack that for me a bit. When you talk about, understanding and the timing and engaging with the customer timing, what do you mean by timing in that sense?
Mm. So let's say let's say that I'm about to get a new mortgage because I am having some life moment decisions in my life. Let's say that I've just gotten married and I'm looking for a new mortgage with my partner. That is a life personal moment for me. And a lot of times we currently wait in the industry for customers to contact the bank to say, hey, I have this need. But I think AI is flipping all of that because, or it should anyway, because now the question should be these life-changing moments are happening in a customer's life. How can we best support the customer in that before they even have to feel the need to contact us to ask us for additional help, etc. So it's more about the right timing. Maybe another example would be, let's say I have tried to make a payment on my app, more of an everyday point. Life's changing moments in our lives perhaps don't happen every day, but on an everyday basis, if I'm trying to make a payment and it fails on the app or online banking for one reason or another, again, customers often have to lead this interaction in the industry where they have to then contact the bank to say, hey, I'm trying to make this payment, it's not working, what's wrong? AI can help us change that entire journey to help the customers at the point of contention instead of making it more reactive, as often industry practices are today.
So how should banks then go about designing that AI-based interaction?
I think for me, the crux of all of this comes down to having strong foundations. So if we don't have good data, for example, to being able to recognize when a point of failure or when is to recognize what is the right moment to speak with the customer, for example, that's where the failure happens. Now, a lot of particularly legacy or traditional processes in the background, these data points exist for a lot of industry players here. It's the joining up of all these data points that becomes problematic. So the data fabric often isn't an intelligent layer in itself. And you may have data, but as a bank, you'll need to go into one system to see that point, another system to see another point. And from a customer perspective, that becomes quite disparate. I'm sure we've all been in places where or called up or spoken to a company, irrespective of what industry this is. And if we're ever transferred in a call, we end up having to repeat ourselves again and again and again. And you, as a customer, you're wondering, okay, why are you not all talking to each other? Why do you not know what's already happened? So that's where that's to me that foundation needs to be set up really well to be able to utilize it for AI.
I mean, now you're touching on something that's very close and dear to my heart, which is organizational change, particularly as I'm a professor of organizational transformation. I just wondered, can you how do banks go about bringing about this transformation? Because what you're talking about is quite fundamental, really, in terms of how banks are structured and how they work.
Mm, it's a great question. I think the most important thing is to understand that all of these changes, such transformational changes, are end to end. So a clear operating model with really good and clear ownership is vital. I think sponsorship from the leadership all the way to from the top needs to be there as well on strong foundations for us to utilize. And I think apart from just end-to-end delivery, we all need to be driven by the customer outcome that this is going to bring us. If we lose that, that's when you start to lose out on value and not understanding what exactly are we trying to do here. And that's where a lot of organizations get lost because oftentimes these are multi-month, if not multi-year transformation programs. So if we're not grounded to what is what the key purpose to making our customers' outcomes better, teams, initiatives, programs can lose focus very quickly.
So this data and these data foundation that you're talking about, um, how do banks come about this? How have you got some examples perhaps internally of how you all have gone about doing this?
I think apart from just making sure that the entire organization is lined up and driven to create a strong foundation, because having a good and intelligent data fabric is not just for AI. That is quite literally these days for everything, because that is how we can make our customers' outcomes better. Um, when you start off, you need to have the right platforms, you need to have the right architecture, you need to have something that actually enables business decision making and not just something that's standalone in the data side. I think from my experience of what often happens, particularly in kind of legacy and large industry players, is data is seen as a kind of standalone endpoint somewhere on the side. And often these very large ownership areas, so data, tech, or CIO, or business, they can sit in their own siloed areas. Yes, sure, there'll be some people in the transformation teams who will connect them all, but individually they are driven perhaps by different priorities, by different timelines, and by definitely by different skills. The skills aspect, yes, that's more understandable, but we should all be moving to a more multi-skilled area where everyone's more data literate and everyone understands the value equally of what this means for the business and for the customer. The moment you start to join these up, I mean, agile transformation, agile methodologies are a great way to bring people together in a single squad as well. And having tribes that are led by that one mission and one vision that helps our customers make our customers' lives better and easier. You'd have a strategy that creates value for customers through one vision. So I'm just going to take one example from a customer journey. So say that example that I brought up earlier about a failure point in my payment that I'm making on an everyday basis. If I'm trying to make that better for being more proactive rather than reactive, what I'd start looking at is doing a full mapping of a customer journey and understanding the fail points for those customer journeys. When those fail points are there, you start to map out where's the data line here? What systems do I need access to get to the customer outcome that I'm trying to reach, which is of course, we'd want to fix the journey of why there's a failure point happening, but that could happen for multiple reasons. It could be that the customer is subject to fraud or anything in those cases, which can't be stopped. But what you can do is start to proactively reach out to fix the issues that are causing this. Um, so you have the data, you have the strategy, you have the customer outcome that you're trying to drive, and you start to look at, right, what's the business case here? And that's where you start to look at what's going to be the end goal here. Is the customer satisfaction going to improve? Is the customer outcome going to become more predictable and better? And in what way? How are we going to measure that? And I think that's probably a very important point for me, because oftentimes these things end up forgotten until the very end of the project or initiative or the program. And by that point, everyone else has moved on already. So that measurable point needs to be kind of considered at the very beginning, just like everything else. And then, of course, you start to actually get this ball moving on the delivery, and you involve my own view of this is that we should involve people as early as possible, even people from the periphery teams who are not perhaps the core squad delivering the initiative or developing the initiative, but people from risk, from compliance, from any other areas that would have downstream impact. I think one of my pet peeves is to hear that there's going to be an impact to something that I'm owning and be told about it only at the very end, because that type of mentality or methodology doesn't work very well for anyone, because it doesn't allow people to plan better, as well as think of other ways this entire change could create value. If you have a good, intelligent data fabric, like I said earlier, the value is far more than just AI. The value can be in so many folds, in so many ways. So giving people not just a heads up, but involving them in the process earlier allows you to have a diversity in mindset as well as a diversity in the value that you may not have thought of.
I mean, that is a wonderfully comprehensive answer to what was quite a tough question. So, well, eh, because and the reason why I was asking is because it seems to me that particularly in AI adoption, there is a huge amount that, in my view, is overhyped, and I just wondered if you could maybe reflect on um, kind of where is this overhype? Are there areas which are being kind of almost underestimated in terms of what needs to be done? And how do we bring a dose of reality to AI adoption?
Think what's perhaps overhyped in my own opinion, my humble opinion, is the interface layer on the AI side. So often we'll see a very polished interface in like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever else, all the different tools that we have in place. A polished interface on weak foundations is never going to get us transformation, true transformation in an organization. The market is understandably quite fascinated with this amazing fluent language and polished assistance that Gen AI can enable us to create. These co-pilots and kind of beautifully packaged experiences for a user. And of course, yes, that absolutely matters because that is quite important. But what we can become so captivated by now is what AI sounds like that sometimes perhaps as users we forget to ask whether the underlying guidance or outcome is actually better, not just more polished and pretty. Um, and I think a compelling interface can be impressive without being transformative. To think that that's equally important. I also think perhaps there's too much hype around the idea that Gen AI can somehow compensate for weak process design or poor data foundations. I think we all have heard the whole argument of garbage in, garbage out. So no, AI can't magically fix poor foundations or poor process design. And I think that's probably where a big distinguishing factor is for AI in general. We should be asking ourselves questions about, is the process even good right now? Can it be different? And a massive part that's underestimated, in my opinion, is asking ourselves the questions of what can I do with AI that I could never have imagined doing without it? Because now I don't need to worry perhaps about the small tasks that can perhaps be made better and more meaningful with Gen AI. So then the question becomes now, what do I focus my time, energy, and mental power on? What can I do for our customers that I could never even imagine doing before? And I think that that's the big distinguishing factor for me. So that's the underhyped and the overhyped element.
How do you see that playing out when banks are then trying to actually implement AI?
It goes back to being grounded in the outcomes that you are trying to create and then being able to measure it for me. Um, if we don't measure what the outcome that we were expecting to have, we get lost as people. These large transformation programs, projects, however you want to position it, they get lost. And I think that's where having clear vision and mission is very important. And then, of course, measuring that at every stage is equally important. And I think trust and durability is also really important. So, for example, I'm just going to go back to my payment failure example because that's something that I imagine most of us have experienced once or more. Um, if the outcome that we're trying to make is, of course, to fix whatever the end point of that journey is to make those failure rates reduced, that's one KPI that I would be measuring. Another one would be, can I see that the customer satisfaction has increased? Or equally, on the opposite side, have the customer complaints decreased? Have I seen any impact in those types of metrics that everyone will already measure? Other points, of course, would be have I been able to proactively reach the customer's need before they had to reach out to me? And how we do that, of course, is that timing point that we mentioned earlier. Have I been able to create meaning for the customer before they needed to contact me and take time out of their hectic day?
From your perspective, Mosh, I just wonder, what do you think are some of the more common, or what are some of the missteps, errors that you've seen organizations make when trying to scale AI?
I think perhaps the biggest mistake that organizations or people can make is scaling use cases before they scale capability. So sometimes we're all so focused on Gen AI being able to do something so quickly that we forget that something that needs to be sustained in an organization needs to be done at a scale. And I use this, I'm going to just use this as a silly example, but I love cooking in my own personal life and at my home. And I love experimenting. So when I cook, I try and bring all of the different flavors from different cultures and different cuisines, and I absolutely love that. Now, if you ask me the question, can you repeat that again and again? I'm probably going to say no, because that is not where my passions lie. But that's exactly the type of analogy and questioning that we should be doing in an organizational transformation scale. Can you move beyond experimentation? Because beyond experimentation and scaling is what happens when you have something consistent, done responsibly, and done in a way that's very repeatable. That's how you scale things. And that's perhaps where a lot of organizations fail to see the value in Gen AI because they haven't fully moved across from experimentation to scaling.
And how have you seen that work within Santander? Can you give us some examples of where that scaling has happened effectively?
Yeah, I can give some examples in the industry. So I think a lot of experimentation starts from proof of concepts,
Hmm.
which is great, but volume is not maturity. So volume of proof of concept is not maturity. I would even go as far as to say volume of use cases is not a reflection of the maturity of AI usage in an organization. What is more reflective of the capability and maturity is the value it creates for the customer, the value it creates for the business equivalently, and of course, how many needs have you been able to fulfill through this repeatable and scalable foundation that you've or capability that you've built with AI? Those three questions would be what answers a maturity point for me. And at Santander, be at Santander or anywhere else in the industry, to me, those are the three things that help us really understand, has this initiative, this proof of concept, this experimentation, this business case or idea been transformational for us?
And talking about transformation, what can you see outcomes that have actually changed in banking today?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I have seen other banks, Santander, and honestly, every player in the industry these days, every large player in the industry create value for customer in different ways possible. One of the value from a customer experience perspective that I've seen become really meaningful is in customer experience, being able to answer the customer's queries in a contextual, calm, and coherent manner more than what perhaps we've been able to do in the past before Gen AI became the most powerful engine or that's talked about. Um, to me, the customer has felt more understood, not processed, and I think that's the big distinguishing factor that we make sure that we want to do in implementing AI for our customers' needs, making our customers' needs better. And designing around the weight of the moment is probably the most important. I've mentioned timing and moments a lot here, but there's a distinguishing point here, right? So some moments need speed. Say my card is lost or stolen. I need speed at that point. I also need some reassurance. So some moments need speed, some moments need explanation, and some probably need reassurance and a bit of hand-holding. A good Gen AI engine knows the difference and what to do when those moments occur.
I tell you, this notion of moments, I think, is really fascinating. But when you unpack that, it seems to me that there are moments that go through it in all our lives. And you talked about some big ones, I don't know, getting married or buying a house. These are big moments, or
Mm.
moving from one place to another, moving jobs. These are significant moments in people's lives, and I can see how those get demarcated. But what about those other, and you've given one example of a day-to-day moment, but in terms of payments, that a payment that fails. But there are so many moments. How, from a banking perspective, are you capturing all those moments, making sense of all those moments, and then turning those into ways in which the banks can respond, or the bank can respond to those moments?
I would say it comes down all the way to two things. One, understanding the customer better, truly understanding the customer, not just when they contact us, for example, but understanding the customer's needs, understanding where they are in their life based on the interactions that we see. And that interaction doesn't have to be a call or a branch visit, for an example, from a banking perspective. That interaction could be just usage of the banking services and products. The second most important point there would be understanding your customer journeys. So at what point will someone's life moment make a change? At what point will this customer journey be triggered for a customer? And combining those two will be the most key factors for for understanding and answering that.
Thank you for that, and trying to kind of get under the skin of understanding these moments. Um, but if I were to ask you to look maybe, and I was going to say 4 to 5 years, but given the rate at which AI is moving, I'm going to pull that back a bit and say, if I were to ask you, maybe take a 2 or 3 year view, what's going to differentiate, banks that have genuinely embraced AI from ones that have kind of tinkered at the edges?
AI is progressing at a pace that no one has seen before for any technology transformation, whether it was online banking or the apps era. So we'll all have to bear with each other. But my personal opinion would be that banks that have truly embedded AI, the transformation will look a lot less dramatic from the outside than what perhaps we think it might. It shouldn't be a separate initiative. It should just feel part of how the institution works. And I think the winners will feel far easier to deal with from a customer experience perspective and equally easier to trust. Because if that trust is missing, then I won't feel like I want to share for more information or more custom with the organization. And it shouldn't feel like this is kind of the AI bit and these are the AI initiatives in the organization. It should just feel a completely seamless experience that I experience as a customer. I think something else to add or consider here would be that the differentiating factors would be coherence for the customer as well as internally for the bank. What exactly are we trying to achieve here? And what am I as a customer going to get out of this experience or this value that AI is creating for the organization? Intelligence should be embedded across all the customer journeys, risk, operations, service, even prioritization of different initiatives, because ideation is almost the easier part. Execution is the harder and the hardest part in any organization. But the point I'm trying to make is that all of these are joined up and not just kind of added on into legacy processes, which I would probably say is another mistake that a lot of organizations do, which is to put AI on top of legacy processes to make them prettier. There's a saying that someone used to say to me, which is, "Don't put lipstick on a pig," because that's not going to do what you're trying to achieve. And I think a lot of us sometimes feel that, right, what are the quick wins and the quick outcomes that we can get? And whilst that is absolutely the right place and the right question to ask, it should also be bolted on to, right, am I truly transforming? Is this going to truly transform? And if I'm truly transforming, I'll need to go all the way back to the foundations and have the capability, the data, the intelligence layer driving the right outcomes here. I think another differentiating factor for successful players in 2 to 3 years will be organizations who ask philosophical questions as well as the technical questions. AI should not be seen as a side technical point only. I think we've mentioned and talked about that before. But philosophically, we have to ask questions to ourselves about what is AI truly for here? Is it simply there to industrialize practices more aggressively? Or is it there to create the clearer guidance, the stronger trust for our customers, and more meaningful value for customers and society overall? And for me, the winners for those organizations will choose the second path of those questions. They will use AI in a way that's not just technically scalable, but ethically grounded and socially sustainable as well. They'll know where automation adds value and where explanation and explainability side is absolutely essential and where accountability has to remain very explicit. I think the future leaders will not simply have more AI, they will have better intelligence applied more coherently, contextually, and responsibly at scale.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and in particular, bringing into play the notion that AI is not just a technology, it has impact at so very many different levels. You talked about understanding the strategy and being really clear about the strategy. You talked about being really clear about what the customer's needs are and being really focused, not just playing lip service to those customer needs, but actually genuinely engaging with what it is that customers value and then responding with customer value. I think the point that you made, which was just laying AI on top of existing processes that are broken, is not going to be helpful. And I can't agree with you more on that point, but I'm really pleased that you highlighted that in particular. So Moush, thank you so much for joining us on the AI Adoption Podcast. I really am grateful for your time and for you sharing your insights. And of course, as ever, thank you to all the listeners.
Thank you for having me.